Well, welcome back to another episode of season two. This is episode 14 of A Conversation to Create the Future. And today, live on Facebook and through YouTube, I meet with Ryan, the entrepreneur, and my name is Arjan Visser, the futurist. And we have been talking, Ryan, over a couple of months now about entrepreneurship, futurizing, leadership. And my memory of the last episode was actually that shared purpose as being a centering element of people together, of being human. And I would love to go deeper into that today. And by the way, it's great to be back on the show with you.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and so it's also streaming through different podcast channels. And but I was just thinking, like last time we talked about shared purpose of being so essential for us as human beings to be in a place where we can grow, where we can develop, and actually where we, besides having the sense of our purpose is met, that we also are doing something that's meaningful for us.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah, and thinking about that, I thought like, okay, now I am in a team or a group of people. We are together because our individual purposes, they come together, they work together for the benefit of all others. And actually me being in this team, I can learn, I can grow, and that's meaningful for myself. So I'm in the right place, but it's also meaningful for the result that the team at the end of the day needs to deliver.
Absolutely.
But I
Totally.
also thought, like, where are we going as a team? How does that develop? Like my purpose is in the now, your purpose is in the now. So we are in this place, this space, but you have dreams, I have dreams, we have new dreams, we have new desires.
Yeah.
And so how do we move forward and not pushing each other outside of the team?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think it comes down to how we engage each other. Do we engage each other only with our own vision and our own sort of things that are meaningful to us as sort of the container, if you will, of how we engage each other, or do we take more of like a what I would call like an ecosystem approach, or um, a supra vision where there's room for other visions, there's room for other
Mm,
perspectives, and and I can contribute to yours, and you can contribute to mine, and we can sort of explore the overlap there, and even borrow from each other. You mentioned a learning experience, and one of the great things about a team, I think, is that we can borrow from each other, right? You can have a purpose that resonates with me, and like, oh, well, that's meaningful to me too. And so it's learning, it's discovery, it's so many things in there that can be complementary instead of sort of from a competitive standpoint.
yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, that brings back memories in the. Actually, I need to go back to there, to the boardrooms. Like I've missed it over the last year and a half, like crazy. Um, but in the boardroom where we talk about the vision, we talk about the team and the team dynamics and the ecosystem of moving forward. I remember that we don't talk about, like, in the context of shared purpose. It's not like our purposes overlap. No, it's more like, no, we have areas of our purpose that overlap, but we also have individual areas.
Hmm.
And the benefit is in the overlapping areas, but my team members, they need their full circle. So
Yeah.
if they are in a happy place, me knowing that it takes to do things that are not part of my purpose, but I know that they contribute to my purpose in much rich experience, contribution, insights, if the
Hmm.
other areas are included.
Yeah,
So you
definitely.
get some kind of a collective perspective, which is centered around what we have as, let's call the word, use the word overlapping purpose.
Hmm. Yep.
But there are parts each individual have that don't overlap with the whole group or just with a few in the group. That needs attention as well, so they can develop holistically, and by that have a much richer influence and impact in the group. So much more influence and impact on my personal learning, if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
it does. I think there's so much talk around diversity, and yet I think what's popular right now in terms of what's being emphasized around diversity is really only skin deep or surface level, and
Yeah.
it still lacks, I think, the like what you're talking about, the more granular level of shared purpose or overlapping purpose, where the whole person is invited in and not made to feel like they have to cram their purpose into this kind of preconceived box that's been constructed for them. So it I think it some of the leadership mentality around organizational vision, around um, not having this supervision or ecosystem model in mind, it actually leaves people to leave part of themselves at home, and I think it's a disservice both to the team as well as the person. So
Yeah, in that perspective, I think the world is going crazy around inclusion and diversity. Um, it looks sometimes like it's more like statistic based, and so someone is invited in a certain team based on some characteristics or attributes or competences, and in a way not holistically as a person. So that person is actually included but not inclusive because some parts don't fit. And I
mhm.
think that we just completely missed the point, because actually we need diversity to have all the different influences in our lives. So a person is a part of the group because it's beneficial for that person, and that person's personal development is beneficial for the other people in the group.
Yeah,
So
that's
the data or the statistics involved should be about, like, is it meaningful and purposeful for that person, and if
correct.
so, is it meaningful and purposeful for all other individuals in the group, and not based on an attribute.
Yeah.
And I know that in some circles this sounds a bit like I'm walking on thin ice, but at the end of the day, we want to be just in there because it's beneficial for the individuals, and by
Yeah.
that for us together.
Yeah. It might sound controversial, but I just don't think currently diversity and inclusion goes way far enough that it approaches it from a standpoint of, like you said, still taking a containerized box and trying to press it on something for a predetermined outcome instead of let's look at individuals as their entire, like you said, their whole person, and really approach it from a more human centered approach. And I think that level of diversity goes so much deeper and actually brings intrinsic value to the difference instead of just a toleration of difference. It actually, I think, infuses great meaning and personal value in the individual, and more authentically celebrates diversity without sort of a, you know, top down kind of forced approach. So
Mm.
I think it's important. I just think the world's current model of it is somewhat dysfunctional. So
Yeah, it is definitely, and like circling back to the title of the series of our conversations, it is about a conversation actually to create the future. And when I was thinking about the title, like I saw somewhere a quote, um, and I was like, if we want to create the future, we should change the conversation, and that triggered me, because most conversations are about solving problems,
hmm
which of course is good. And I talk a lot about that with Bench, Bench, in
yep,
the episode The Innovator, and I always like it when he says, like, it's really good to have clarity on your problem, because actually you will probably find out you don't have to find a solution for your problem, because there is something else happening, and that helps by like finding the problem instead of just fixing the problem. And I think we as men are always accused of like trying to fix the problems, and maybe there is no, the problem is not there to fix, it's a symptom of something different. And I
sure,
think that's in around as well, like the conversation is, I would say, wrong, happening around diversity and inclusion,
hmm
because it's talking about a problem, and we should talk about creating a future. And I think it's so essential in the future that we start to find out who to run with, because for the moment we share purpose. So it's the right place for us to be, to contribute in the development other people are having. And
hmm
it's for our own learning experience the best place to be. And for the moment, so maybe we hop in a team and then we hop off later because shared purpose is no longer there,
hmm
which
yep,
also makes us to look at relationships in a different way, because they are the context in which we learn or add value. um, but looking to learning, and my wife in that, like, experience based learning, um, I'm so impressed that most settings are not nurturing learning. They are repeating successes from the past, or they are data driven. Um, and we try to repeat the past, and by that think we learn, or maybe even like it sounds really stupid if you put it in this way, like we repeat the past and we think we learn something new. We even think that we will have innovative solutions by repeating the past. If I just bring it down, I think if we repeat the past, we just get the same thing as in the past. Which means if we have a problem today and we repeat tomorrow, we'll or repeat yesterday, we will have the same problem tomorrow. Or is that too simple?
no, I think, you know, some of the leaders on the entrepreneurial innovation side of things talk about how most business innovation comes with new business model, and that is about doing something different. It's about introducing something new to something that's not been connected to it before. It is in fact kind of a commonality or a parallel to what you're talking about in terms of changing the conversation. So there's a shift in where the value and the focus moves to that actually can transform thing. But you know, a business model is the foundation of a business. Um, in society, the framing or the conversation is really sets the stage to what that naturally kind of ends in. Conclusions made, uh, concepts of thought in terms of how it's being viewed, a lens perhaps that's being borrowed or promoted. So, yeah, I think I think all these things kind of tie together between the two. So,
Yeah, if you when you say those words like a lens being borrowed or we jump in conclusions, well, then in generally we apply patterns we have applied before.
mhm,
So in that sense, we repeat the past.
mhm, yeah,
And in problem solving, we have, of course, this convergent versus divergent way of thinking. And for those who don't know those terms, I would say drawing conclusions versus generating more options. And I think that last one is so important, that we start to generate more options.
yeah,
It starts, I believe, in a team with being not in the team as like, this is our shared purpose. This is what we need to protect because else we disconnect. But I think it is like, no, we should generate more options. We should explore more personal desires and see if they can be met by the team.
yeah,
And and I know we spoke up front, and I said that's a bit like assumption based learning, and you said immediately like red flag, like we don't use that word in America that much because it means this and this. And I thought, yeah, it does. So it is that. I think assumption is meaning like I make an assumption based on what I desire, and actually I start anticipating to see that happen, manifest, demonstrate,
yeah,
and start to explore what it takes to get that assumption to become reality.
yep,
Could be a leap of faith, but a leap of faith includes a strategy and actions to actually start acting and behaving to what I have faith for. But
right,
it also includes this emotional state that I start to look forward to it, anticipate to it, in that sense that when it happens, that I recognize it. And but it's so different than all the data. Of course, data, it's easy to control. Check the boxes, KPIs are met, measurements we can measure. Like, oh, we love it, we can measure it. And assumptions we can't. Never seen it before.
yeah. Although it's being a process, the equivalent of that process in the entrepreneur startup ecosystem is a series of hypotheses, right? So, um, the whole lean startup, get out of the building kind of thing that's been pretty widely popularized really puts people in that posture in a startup, at least optimally so. Worst case scenario, as an entrepreneur, you take us the large assumption of you know build it and they will come, which is you see a lot of businesses crash because there's not that engagement with others in the process, that testing, that curiosity, that so a process that postures itself around incremental hypothesis is still assumption based, but it has also a logic and a reasoning and um, an intentional process to it. So
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, what I love about lean startup is actually there are a lot of good elements in it. But what I actually love is that you upfront, based on the assumption you have, the minimal viable product that you created, you upfront decide what you want to learn.
yes,
So these learning milestones, it's not the goal setting.
right,
And actually I'm not a huge fan of a goal setting, because from a leadership perspective, it's quite hard to not fall into drawing conclusions like, oh, we have reached it, we have fulfilled our vision. No, you've just met the first goal. And but when you make it learning milestones, like, oh, I'm not there to hit the mark, but actually to pass the mark and navigate it like from milestone to milestone to get at the end to where I have what I have vision for. and and by doing that exercise up front, you actually you anticipate some kind of measurements that you're going to use to pivot or to persevere.
Yeah.
Which, if you don't do that, and that was my biggest takeaway from the whole lean startup. It's like, oh, I anticipate on the milestones. I anticipate what I need to learn so that I can make the right decisions in the future to persevere or pivot. Now everything is hallelujah, hosanna, and I believe in it. I have faith. Like, well, like we can do it. We have this mentality. Like we can do it. But then when the problems really start to happen, we can fall back on like, oh, this is what we need to learn. Did we learn it? Yes, no. Okay. Do we pivot or do we just persevere in this hard time and go the extra mile, even when it doesn't seem to be the right thing on the symptoms? But we decided up front, this is what we need to learn before we can make a decision. I love that part of the whole lean startup.
Yeah. Yeah. I love the language shift from goal to milestone. I mean, they're obviously complementary in some respects, but milestone just loudly proclaims that it's a it's just one benchmark of a process. And there's a lot of push towards kind of creating continuous learning environments, from the education system to within businesses. And so I think that whole experiential lean approach posturing into milestones and making decisions, it's just a healthy way to navigate the future and bring intention to it at the same time. So
It's a bit with the beacons that you do with a sailing boat or any boat when you go up a river. Like you don't hit the beacons. You should not. Probably it happens when you try to learn how you call it. You call it a drive a boat. Do you drive a boat? Do you sail a boat?
steer,
Steer a
I
boat.
don't know. Probably
No.
depends on the type of boat. I'm not an expert in that.
Yeah. And but actually, you want to go. You want to pass them or go between them, and there is some a range where you can still be on track. And yeah, that I think that's really good because then you can experience something new without understanding it right away, but you experience it, and then your rational thinking can be upgraded at the end. And by understanding like some new knowledge, some which means some new language, and that's so the milestone helps you to more or less reflect and define that new knowledge, that new language, so you understand and you becomes part of your backpack, and to show off with others and look smart and wise because you've learned something. And but at the same time, the process is really like, I anticipate for what I assume to be the right thing,
Hmm.
and now I start to collect some evidence that it is the right thing.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
data always comes at the end. But the
Yeah.
outside world, I have so many friends from my previous career that are like everything or like predicting based on data, big data. And I always like scratch my head and I think, what do you want to predict? Like you can make amazing reports out of combining data and big volumes of data, but they're all indicators of what happened before. That they're not indicating what is going to happen. Give me scenarios of likelihood, but
Hmm.
isn't it the financial market? We have some kind of this tagline, and in Dutch it sounds translated to English a bit like guarantees from the past do not predict anything from the future, or successes from the past are not guarantees for the future.
Yeah.
But isn't that with anything new?
Um, it is, yeah. But do think it comes down to probabilities, right? So um, there's a desire to predict the future, or at least enhance our odds or probability of what something could do. Um, so I see the role of data, um, but I do think it has its place, but it's not. It should not be steering the ship in terms of. It's a tool, not a solution. So
If I bring that to the human body, I think like I should be directed by my intuition, my spirit, and not by my intellect or my rational thinking. When I watch the news or read the newspapers, I'm sorry, I did it again. Um, I always think like, but this is not speaking to my heart. This is not speaking to my intuition, my spirit. It's actually just feeding my brain with more arguments, data, and well, in the last couple of years, it hasn't been like, oh, now I feel more happy.
well, you bring up a danger of data, which is um, whoever has the data or is using the data, you can portray data honestly, or you can definitely take an agenda to the data and find what you're looking for. So there is that kind of two-edged side of data that, on the one hand, it can give insight. On the other hand, it can be definitely used for manipulation and influence, and we know influence can be used for good or ill. So
Yeah, we know all the political scenarios from the current years, and the medical and the health issue and the economic one, and yeah, and probably everyone has wondered multiple times. Like I hear the opposite story based on the same data, um, and I always love to take the example of coffee. Like so many research has been done to the benefits or the harm of coffee. I've never found the research. So if there is anyone out there that has that research, like what is coffee doing to my body? I have found so many research that really like preaches it's like the holy thing to take because it's like a magic stuff and it cures everything. To stories like don't touch it. It destroy your energy, your levels. And so I always think it's the same stupid pit of a berry, confused to be called a bean, roasted or burned, and now no one can explain me what it does, what the nutritions are. But there's so many research out there saying it's bad, and there's so many research saying it's good. And it tends to be like that. We have a message, so or an opinion, and we support it with data. But that puts the data in a format that creates a story, a narrative, and the narrative becomes something of its own.
indeed, it does.
But then when I look to learning and education, it feels like it's the opposite. That, well, there is definitely a narrative that is transferred through education. That's the whole didactics.
Hmm.
And we had many debates one on one and in our calls about like, is the didactic now really the most natural way of learning? And to just summarize, like it's like we transfer knowledge, we transfer skills, and we transfer attitude. And I strongly believe it is inside out and upside down. Like let's start with helping someone to discover their attitude, then develop their skills, and then gain knowledge, which means I have no control because I don't know what skills they actually develop.
Yeah.
It's a bit like asking my kids to do something to their own insights. One day we have to ask them to do that.
Yeah. Well, that's ironically parenting. It was the model that came to mind, right? I've got four kids. Youngest is 15, oldest is 21, and that adolescent years is that process you just outlined, where, yeah, well, starting younger than that, obviously, but becoming aware of your attitude, becoming aware of what's in you, personal designs, gifting, skills, what's now, what can be developed, finding, really navigating the future. That's integral to what I want my kids to experience, whether that's, personally, professionally, um, and that whole model of discovery, that was really something I emphasized on a local university here as well, in a workshop of, you can, even with the same degree, going through the same program, like, there's this mentality that you can only go and do a very narrow scope of things with that degree, and yet reality is you can take that degree and probably do 50 different things with it. And yet most students are kind of locked into this, um, logical progression that's relatively linear. And I think it's experiential learning forces people out of that, in a good way. So,
Well, it asks the individual, both the facilitator, teacher, one end, and the student learner at the other end, to, well, grow up. Both just grow up, become mature, and don't try to control the other person's development. Because, first of all, I think you don't have the right to do that. And at the other end, it is probably fear based. And
yeah,
what that means, it's harder to develop a measurements. And we know there are education systems they don't do tests because it's hard to test. And if your kids are a little bit more intuitive or creative thinking, we know that their intellect can't be catched by a test at all. Like we had our annual conversations with the teachers, and they said, well, the tests, the exams, they don't represent actually what your kids understand, know, and can apply, which is really a shame.
yeah,
Yeah, and the only thing I could think, yeah, no, that's the big default of the system. And people are not there to serve the system. That's always unnatural, which means going back to that purpose thing, you ask a group of people that share purpose not to live up to a certain level of behavior, but actually you ask them to find out the right behavior themselves, which to deliver a result. So
absolutely.
you judge the result as the leader, the client of that team, and you're not judging the behavior.
Right,
But when I look to the workforce, there are so many that shift from we judge results to we have to look at adjusting behavior, that I think, well, stay away from it. All those culture change programs in businesses that I think people have to adjust their behavior. Yeah, based on what?
right,
A culture design? Like, and I always give leaders just one example. The culture you want to create, live it. The behavior you want to see your people do, show it to them.
yeah,
It's like, if you don't model it, no one is modeling it. But now I hear all these people that are not modeling because they are in ivory towers, but they have a opinion and even a program to change people their behavior. And a friend of mine was involved in it. I said to him, like, if you want to change people, their behavior, let them experience what's meaningful to them.
Yep.
If it's not meaningful, then you want to perform them like a monkey to show behavior that's not connected to what's meaningful to them,
Right.
then don't count me in, because I just see it as manipulation.
Yeah.
And actually, I said, I call it different than manipulation. I call it witchcraft, because you're just creating an atmosphere to just pull the strings and get people to do behavior that is really not connected to what's meaningful to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
um
You mentioned modeling it, and you also earlier mentioned something I think that's really key, which is transferring ownership to the individual, which
yeah,
is a fundamental kind of foundation of them receiving and recognizing their own responsibility in the mix. And some people can't handle that. Some people are not ready for that. And even as adults, want to be told A, B, C, check the boxes and check out. And but yet people thrive when they have ownership, because where there's meaning, there's intrinsic motivation, and we know that energy and passion and all these things flow towards things that are personally meaningful. And so if you really want to shift a culture, you start by modeling it, and and then you transfer ownership as a leader to the individual, so that they can begin their own journey of discovering and aligning their own time and energy and resources to what's personally meaningful. And that I think that starts to get exciting, because it starts to overflow into really every other area of life, from professional to personal or vice versa.
yeah,
So
yeah. I think those are the important keys, the major keys. um I've seen organizations try to shift it, and they started to ask the people what they think, and how they would do it differently if they would have a creative solution. I have heard people react to that. They said, why should I answer that question? It's not in my contract. I'm not paid for it. And you and I both believe that if people have ownership and it becomes meaningful and purposeful, then learning and happiness and fulfillment of life becomes all part of the package. The reality is that most people say, I'm not paid to do that. I'm not taking that risk. So they are getting confused, because you're not asking them, you're not clear about the ABC. And now you ask them to define themselves what letter to take. They
right.
just want to hear ABC. They don't want to be happy. They don't want to be purposeful. They don't want to be meaningful. They just don't want hassle. They don't want to be bothered. They just want to have a good review, measure it up front, predict it up front. So actually, they are in the same system of the stuck in the data of, I don't want creativity. I don't want purpose and meaning. I just want my no worries, no stress, and paid.
And if you think about the systems, the historical experience of most people in these systems, from education to the workforce, that has been the history, right? The history has been figure out the answer that's right and repeat it. And that carries on in the workforce. So, there's a leap of, so when there's a transfer of leadership, like you just said, in terms of actually extending that invitation to do that, that's understandably met with skepticism and resistance, because there's not necessarily been a track record or a history or a context where there's actually been value attributed to that is consistent, right? So, the historical kind of parallel is this a gotcha moment? If I say something that you don't want as a leader, what's the actual response? Am I going to get dinged, or are we actually going to
Yeah.
celebrate? Are we actually going to celebrate and welcome the whole person into the room, right? So, it goes back to the modeling thing and the establishment of trust over time for those things to really allow for themselves to even be accepted and embraced. So,
Yeah, we have to go to that setting that people know that it's honest and true, that they are celebrated for who they are.
yeah,
Going back to like real diversity and inclusion, that you're celebrated for who you are, celebrated for your development, living your purpose. But on the other hand, people currently will be very suspicious if that's not modeled, but just communicated to them, because they are tolerated, because they are not screwing up.
yeah,
And so there is a shift which starts with the leader. So we always go like entrepreneurship is leading people,
hmm,
and it starts with leading yourself. So if you as a leader are still like, I don't want to screw up, so I don't take risk and I don't develop myself, and I have many conversations with owner managers in businesses, and they said, "Yeah, I'm so busy," and then it was like 1 hour a week to invest in your priority number one, personal development, because that's the only way you can stay ahead of people by living authentic and modeling everything we talked about. So you have to develop 1 hour a week. So most owner managers, how many hours a week do they work? 50, 60? Okay, we all want to go back to 20 and that the business works for us. But reality is 60 hours. Let's
hmm,
go bring it back to 20, then it's still 1 hour is personal development. And that personal development should gain traction into your business and will bring the growth of your individuals and will increase your share results of your business.
yeah,
So that means 1 hour a week to invest in yourself. It's nothing to do with time, and it all has to do with priority.
yeah, definitely.
And and you need a place as a leader to develop and find that new language, gain that new knowledge, start understanding what makes you tick, and start to get your learning milestones and everything we talked about today. So yeah, I think I know we always circle back on that, but find your place as a leader where you're met and pushed forward and pushed back by your peers. A place where you're not lonely, but can be truly out there to explore yourself. So if that's you, if that's you, Ryan, if that's you, Aryan, then make use of this free mastermind and test it yourself if this is the level of peer encouragement coaching that will help you to move forward. So then use the link that's coming in the ticker box on the bottom, thebusinessrevivalists.com/mastermind, and just sign up for a guest session and find out if this is a group of peers that can push you forward.
Yeah, definitely do it. I think so much personal development is, especially by business leaders, if it's not directly tied to a core business initiative, it falls down that priority list. And yet, I think it's the equivalent of sharpening the axe instead of just continuing to swing it. It really does, indirectly and then eventually directly, impact uh, your business as well as your professional life. So definitely
Yeah.
encourage you. Jump in. We'd love to have you.
Yeah. So if any question pops up for anyone listening live or the podcast or the replay, just connect with us. That could be through just the comments on the replay, or just reach out through LinkedIn or Facebook to us directly. And we'd love to chat, love to meet new peers that are in the same boat. trying to navigate from learning milestone to learning milestone. And it is always exciting to find new people and find out if we share purpose. So, Ryan, what's the closing remark you want to give?
If you're not learning, you're not living.
You're not learning, you're not living. Yeah, I second that one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking forward to catch up soon, Ryan, and take to have another conversation to create the future. And I'm looking forward to it. So
Likewise.
thank you for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.